Welcome back to another episode of the B2B Founder Podcast. I'm your host, Brett Trainer. Today, Joey Knecht joins the show. This may be one of my favorite names in the business. Joey's a startup mentor and CEO of a company called Proteus. They're a high-growth technology company that recently launched a new buyer enablement platform called Engaged. Joey and I probe deep into a topic we're both passionate about. You may have guessed it, buyer enablement. In our discussion, Joey expounds on how essential it is in helping founders grow their businesses and maintain good client relationships. We also discussed today, one, his journey towards becoming an advocate for buyer enablement and the critical role of market research and what it played in his development of the product. Maintain long-term relationships by justifying your value to the buyer. Invest early and often in customer success. Why it's important to stay in your lane and own what you do well. The secret sauce of expanding beyond your network. And last but definitely not least, non-traditional tactics for growing your business. I think you will really enjoy this and get a lot of value out of this episode. As a favor, if you enjoy the podcast, please subscribe with the platform of your choice. Reviews and ratings are definitely nice, but the subscriptions really help. Thank you. And now on to the interview. Hey, good morning, Joey. Welcome to the podcast.
Morning, Brett. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. Super excited to get you on to talk some buyer enablement today. I think it's a topic near and dear to both of our hearts. But before we get into the topic, why don't you give the audience a little bit of your background and what you guys are working on today?
Sure. Appreciate it and appreciate your listeners. So yeah, as Brett said, Joey Knecht, CEO of a company called Proteus. My background has been extensively in B2B SaaS products. So as you know, this isn't our first rodeo, mine or yours. And so we've been around a little bit. And so technology world has changed dramatically. When we used to build products for clients back in the day, the number one thing we were doing was buying servers, and look how the cloud has transformed everything. But our team has been involved in, more than 150 enterprise B2B SaaS product developments, which was very successful for our group. And we also spun off a venture capital wing, what we call venture tech, where we started to build products in joint partnership with our partners. And we had the fortunate opportunity to spin off more than 12 companies there. Killed a few because they just didn't really make it. As you know, that's part of the business. But we've had unbelievable success with our portfolio. So that led us to a new product that we're working on now called Proteus Engage, which, as you're aware, is a buyer enablement product. And we look like geniuses because we started this journey 2 years ago and started to really interview a lot of folks and align the fit. And I know we'll chat about this later, but that's really where we found that fundamentally there's just a big shift going on in B2B sales. And companies and sales reps and the buyers are not well equipped for that journey. And so we really went after that problem, and we're seeing great success with this new product that we're taking to market.
Yeah, fantastic. And yeah, we'll definitely get into the buyer enablement and the technology and, why I think that's such a critical aspect right now. But before, I think for the audience, I think it's important to kind of share a little bit of the journey that got you to the buyer enablement platform, because you and I actually had connected. Your first version, you were thinking about, a customer advisory board 2.0, right?
Yeah.
It was a
journey.
I love that concept, but
me too. I still do, Brett. I still believe that there's still a product opportunity there. But I think the great part for your listeners is it's having passion about something, but also intently listening to the market and the potential customers. And so I appreciate you bring that up, because some people might see that as failure, and we saw it as tremendous opportunity. So as I mentioned earlier, we've built a lot of products for corporations, and we have a proven model that we use to do that, which was validating the market, building a prototype, screenshots, pre-selling it, doing all these things for our corporate clients. Well, logically for ourselves, we did the same thing. So about 2.5 years ago, our board asked me to find a new product for us. And so I started that journey by going out and talking with lots of CISOs, vice president of sales, and account folks, VP of accounts, and asking them kind of some of their key bleeding points. Well, one vein that we started this journey on was this concept of customer advisory boards. Obviously, tech companies that are proliferating have have typically these kind of customer advisory boards, which help kind of guide, the product development, the service development for the organization as they do it. Very mission critical piece to their organization and success. So I was like, ooh, that seems like a pretty interesting nugget. One, because I love that kind of stuff because we had built so many products. So probably I had a little emotional connection to it, where I was like, "Ooh, I kind of like that too." So let's go down this rabbit trail a little bit. But quite frankly, after multiple months of researching it, going to some national conferences, and just looking at the economies and the mechanics of it, what we unfortunately found out is customer advisory board in a lot of companies is like a tier 2 interest or concern. And so when we're building new products and new companies, we want to typically have a direct line to revenue, not a soft dotted or even loopy line. And what we found out is customer advisory board, unfortunately, and I don't support this, but frequently are shut down when times are bad, or they really don't give it the effort that truly needs to be there. And I'm not saying all companies, and I don't want to cause a firestorm on Twitter for you that Joey hates customer advisory boards. No, I love them. We're rolling out our own right now for Proteus Engage, but it was definitely a tier 2 bleeding point within the organization, if not a tier 3. And Brett, you and I know when you're investing and trying to build something, you want to be much higher on that list for success. Well, that kind of then pivoted us to still talking to those same folks. And the conversation then came full circle to them saying, Joey, there's really a big shift happening in B2B SaaS sales, where it used to be back in the day, Brett, you and I could meet in Chicago, have a beer, and pretty much get the deal done, do some contracting, and move on to greener pastures. That has completely changed. Everybody now knows in a sales process, you might have anywhere from 3 to 5 people on the selling side and anywhere from literally 10 to 30 people on the buying side. So, because they all have different roles, responsibilities, your internal champions, everybody. So this many-to-many ecosystem in B2B sales has created a tremendous problem for sales reps and, most importantly, the buyers. And that's really where we're focusing a lot of our energies, is how do buyers want to experience the buying process, because ultimately they're in control. Like, no one is selling anymore. You don't sell anybody anything. Nobody gets duped into buying a SaaS product, right, from a corporation. Right. It's consulting to help them get there, and the buyers are ultimately making the decision. So long story, but basically we went down one vein, realized that it wasn't strong enough necessarily to capitalize a super high growth product. But by talking to those same people, it unlocked the opportunity to which we know of today as Proteus Engage for buyer enablement. But it was because we really aligned to something that was extremely a bleeding point for those organizations.
Yeah, and there's so much value in that. And I think, advice for founders of any stage at this point, right? Unless you're already scaling your business, but because you ended up with 2 fundamentally different products and 2 different kind of looks at both customer centric.
Yep.
But you found with the first path, again, which we both liked, it was more of a need to have or nice to have than a need to have for these organizations. Yep. And because of your research, you uncovered what was more of a need to have versus the nice to have, which I'm going to super simplify and call it, the bottom of the funnel, right? A lot of companies are really good at top of the funnel. Or maybe
correct.
Good is a relative term, but there's tools that help you at top. Once you start to move down,
you got it.
It became a much different conversation. So maybe pivot back into that point that, hey, you got your research from these folks and said, all right, maybe we're going to pivot a little bit. Then what was next?
Yeah, so it's an amazing. So you're right. So we figured out that qualified to closed experience where a lot of these people were struggling. But even to help a lot of your partners, again, because we've been involved in so many SaaS high growth companies, the first version of our product. So after we even found the right product, the first version of our product was too complicated. It involved too much design and creative, and it took too long to get deployed out for customers. So to even double down on the learning journey, which I completely believe in, is our first generation product that went out. So I sold it to 13 clients on screenshots. That's how I like to do things, because that truly validates, because a lot of people will tell you they like your idea. Very few people will pay for your idea. So once you get people paying for your idea, now we're becoming kind of real and legit. So we sold it to 13 enterprises for a fair chunk of money, built the first version. But again, going back to that kind of methodology of listening to your customers, we got them going and they're like, it's very complex. It was just too many moving pieces. We needed more of a streamlined experience. And so we worked with those first batch of customers to come up with generation 2 of Proteus and Engage. And of course, we're on like generation 5 now, but we did it with those first batch of customers. And ironically, we moved all of them to the next generation, of course, shortly after that. And that's really when the rubber hit the road for us. So I think that's the key point here, Brett, too. It's not just finding the opportunity. It's also once you've found the opportunity, the product is always going to be pivoting and morphing depending on where it is. And for instance, for us, we started with helping these organizations with new business development, right? Using our tool for qualified to close. But then as we had customers, they're like, Joe, we're loving this for qualified to close of our new clients. And then they said, well, why wouldn't we use this for cross-selling all of our current clients? Because this is creating a relationship between us and our current clients where we can cross-sell them, which is equally a big problem for us moving forward. And so then naturally, the product through the use of our clients has now evolved into helping two sides of the sales process, new business development, new logos coming into the org. And then a big bleeding point area for these groups too is cross-selling to their current client base and maintaining those relationships. So we're really now doing both sides, which we would have never have gotten to if we weren't actively working with our customers, them feeling comfortable saying feedback to us. One of our values in our corporation is candid. And so all of our initial customers, I really stress that we want to hear your feedback. We don't pocket it in and just quit. Like tell us what's going on. We can work this out, right? We can try to figure something out to make everybody successful. And we're just very blessed that that initial batch of customers really helped us, get over the line and really get into a super strong rhythm of product and opportunity.
Yeah, no, it's so true. And I think even, one of the things that I found with your product that I think you just kind of touched on, you talked about from a cross sell, but I think where, again, going back to the customer is even the customer success or, back you and I started, it was account management, then it was client services, now customer success, that, this is a platform that can kind of transition from the buying process. All right, now you've helped the buyer enable them to purchase. Now they're customers. Now it becomes more of a customer enablement type of a tool. And
you bet.
One of the things, and we've had conversations about this, is too many organizations, I don't want to say give up once they sell a customer, but they throw them over the fence, and it's a secondary afterthought. And a good way to churn is, man, if the customer's not using your product or service.
And that's another great point, Brett, around that with a lot of your startups too, is you got to also remember a lot of the times in a SaaS startup or high growth company, a lot of times you might be selling into one user type. What I mean is you're selling into maybe the C-suite or the decision makers. Here's the problem. They don't actually use your product. So you convince them to buy your product for the corporation, and great. Then you deploy with them. So your client success team now takes over the relationship, but that client success team is actually working with the frontline users. So now you have a gigantic disconnect from the people you convinced of your value to the people using it. So then you'll go to your client success team and they'll be like, they love our product, right? They're using it. Everything's great. But then all of a sudden, nobody in leadership sees that transformed value, right? So how do you maintain that relationship with the key decision makers to help justify your investment? Obviously, they're paying you. So how do you justify your account plan? What is your quarterly business review process? How are you identifying new utilization opportunities of the product? How do you identify new product ideas? Again, going back to those same leaders and saying, hey, Frankie, hey, Jessica, what else could we be doing for your organization to help you grow within our product? Boom, new product ideas for you. And they feel connected to you and justify why they're spending that money with you, which is how you keep that lifetime value of the customer extremely longer. And that was really the breakthrough for a lot of our clients. Is they're like, no, we talk to our customers. And we're like, no, you're talking to your users. You're not talking to the buyers. The buyers were probably a part of a leadership team that has been completely disconnected since they signed up with you more than a year ago. And quite frankly, probably two of them have left and they have no idea who you are. And that's a gigantic problem when your bill starts to show up on that quarterly or renewal basis and you're having those oh crap renewal meetings where you're like, I hope they resign, right? It's because you have no relationship and you haven't been justifying your value. That's the part we really unlocked for a ton of clients, is how do you maintain that relationship long term?
That's awesome. And I think it even goes back to when we started the conversation on buyer enablement and taking an outside in versus an inside out look at what your customers are doing. And it is an ecosystem. I love that definition of you're selling into, right? It's not, you can think of it as three individuals, but if you think of it as a business and the CFO needs risk mitigation, right? If I'm going to write a check for this software or this product or this consulting engagement, where is that mitigated? Then to your point, the leadership that's paying for this want to make sure they get the return, and the users are better be getting the good experience. I think that's why it's so important. I've been kind of on the rant about this lately is,
no, me too.
Sales, we still, predominantly we talk about sales enablement, sales operation, important from an internal perspective. But if you think about kind of what your process was and how you evolved to where the product is, you looked at it from the buyer standpoint is how do we get people through the process quicker? And it doesn't end after they write the first check. And I think we're starting to see, at least I've had a number of guests that talk about, sometimes their first C-level hire in these startups is a customer success because, investors want to see you, keep customers. If you're churning customers, that's going to be a problem. The reoccurring revenue, there's just so many themes that we talk SaaS, but I think many more companies are going to start to adopt figuring out how to get a reoccurring revenue model. And so it comes back to the customer. So
I could tell you right now, Brett, one of our portfolio companies did a sizable transaction very, very recently. And the private equity group that came in to do the transaction, the first thing they did is called most of our key customers and asked them, how do you like working with company X? And the group was like, it's amazing. The people are awesome. They totally understand our needs. They're helping us grow, right? Like to your exact point, venture capital, private equity, they're all looking at, are your customers happy? And I completely agree. And this all goes back to that churn and burn too. So many high growth companies are just cattle call of trying to get anybody and everybody into the gates. But the reality is you're churning a lot of them out and you're wasting a lot of resources when you're trying to grow your enterprise there. And so we're real adamant about doing it the right way, taking them through the right sales process. It's a consultative sale nowadays. In sales process, we like to use the word ghosting because that's like an equivalent of saying it wasn't my fault. They're ghosting me. Well, actually, it's your fault. If you're getting ghosted, it means you haven't helped them connect the dots to the value chain, or when they're talking about your product, when you're not there, they don't know how to present you to the different stakeholders, which might be somebody from compliance, which might be somebody from the CFO team or somebody from the ops team or somebody else. So you need to tee those individuals up for success. And so as you mentioned, a lot of these sales enablement tools were more how fast can we slap out a PowerPoint to a potential customer to close a transaction, when in reality, what the modern B2B buyer is looking for is a consultative sell. And as you know, Brett, these buyers are doing a tremendous amount of research online before they even reach out to you. They probably already narrowed it down to 2 or 3 companies by the time they reach out to you. And so now they're looking more for not just, can you sling me some PowerPoints and tell me what your product does and take me through a demo? What they're really looking for is, how can we create a partnership where you understand my business, you can help me generate value around them and understand my business as a whole and help me be more successful. And sometimes that's actually bringing your product in and maybe recommending 2 or 3 others to help them be more successful overall. They're looking for a consultative sell. And so how do you navigate that and communicate that to all the different stakeholders? As I mentioned, the lion's share of our clientele, they're working with clients that have a lifetime value of more than 50,000, which in software sales is not much at all. When you consider your client should at least be with you 3 to 4 years, depending on the industry or type that you're in. And so once you get to that level, the amount of scrutiny on the buyer side now is astronomically high. And so how do you navigate that complex world is really what we've been working against by, quite frankly, talking to the buyers the most, and then bringing those tools and modules into our what we call workspaces to help bridge those people all together to help navigate that process.
Yeah, so good. And I think, you mentioned it a few different ways, a few different times, but I want to go back to that a little bit, where you're not selling anymore, right? You had mentioned referred from others. They wanted to check how good the quality was. And the research is done and narrowed down by the time they're chatting with you. So there's like 3 instances right there. And that's not necessarily the buyer enablement part, so they haven't necessarily engaged with you, but that's another area where I think so many startups have a real opportunity to jump the shark, whatever you want to call it, compared to legacy companies that are not very good with their digital engagement and those types of things. So, man, I'd love to get your perspective on, let's take it back and say, all right, I'm a newer company. We can use you, right? As you guys are starting to grow, and I see your content starting to get out there. How should I start about, obviously as a CEO, you're engaging in quite a few of the sales calls, but now you're hitting a point of, all right, we want to grow this. So talk us back to the engagement awareness side and your thoughts and point of view on it.
So, kind of rule of thumb that I've always, through a lot of the mentors that I've had of successful companies and stuff, that the CEO or the leader sometimes gets too far disconnected too quick in the process. So what I see for a lot of startups that are successful is that the CEO is pretty intently involved in the first 50 to 75 sales of the product. Now you can normalize that depending on your price or the type of product you're selling, right? But
Yep.
ultimately, because as I've already noted in this meeting, is that a lot happens. There's a lot of nuggets in those calls that maybe a junior SDR of yours or a junior AE of yours wouldn't really pick up on. And as you know, Brett, it's what's not being said sometimes, which is much more important than what's being said. And so you need to be kind of thinking about that as the CEO on these sales calls, because that's how fast your product can evolve, right? By getting feedback, listening, asking follow-up questions. What do you mean by that? And so I've seen a lot of tendency in startups that they want to outsource everything. But I think it's okay to outsource, but you need to make sure that you're still involved in that process. You still need to be involved in the sale so that you have your rubber and ear to the road to make sure that you're learning about how to better do your sales, better product enhancements, those things of nature. And then, of course, then scaling out your team accordingly around that, right? But as we've already mentioned, it really leads with client success. Like in our own Engage company, we brought on more client success people earlier and more often than we did salespeople. And I've always said to our team, and it's kind of a funky line, but it's not how you use our product, it's how you use our product, right? And people are like, what? And I'm like, because it's not about demoing a product to people. It's providing them insights on how to use the product to best meet their use cases so that they can be more successful. That is a function of client success.
Right.
And you've mentioned it multiple times now. That's where we've invested a ton in our early stages of the company, is on that client success, because we can go get new clients, but if we're atrocious at delivering and atrocious at making them successful, that's going to hurt us dramatically. So as a startup, you might be like, well, Joe, that's counterbalance to what I always hear about ramp up sales, ramp up sales. I'm not saying not to increase sales, but here's the deal. Your fastest sales and your fastest trust will come from the referrals from your current customers referring you to 5 to 10 of their friends, and all of a sudden your pipeline is pretty full. So you got to sometimes think about success isn't about just hammering out 10 SDRs and building out an entire, now don't get me wrong, we are hiring SDRs, we're hiring 5 right now, we're doing everything, but also remember it has to be a balanced strategy as you do that, and the timing of it. When you have ultimate confidence in your delivery, your mechanisms, your metrics, then you can really hammer out the sales side. But we kind of go a little bit slower to make sure we're delivering the right value and we understand how to frame that, and then you can get into that aggressive sales growth. So just personally, not only from Proteus Engage as we're scaling, but then all of the companies we've been a part of and in our investments, we've seen this it takes time. And I think everybody in startup land kind of believes everything's going to happen in a day, and in a year we're a unicorn and we're going to sell for $1 billion. Instant gratification, a discipline and sticking to the process and again listening and making the right decisions, of course, are key to that. So just and I say this with a lot of failure under the belt, right? This is not everything's been perfect, and so that's kind of a lot where I come from that perspective.
Yeah, and so much good. I'm going to dig into the scaling part here in a second because I want to get your opinion on something. But the one thing you had mentioned that I just want to double click on, if you will, is the CEO staying involved, the founder staying involved, and I think there's a fine line between pivoting too much because one customer gives you feedback. So exactly. I love your perspective on how do you balance it, right?
Yeah.
Where you're still 80-20 maybe. I mean, how do you balance feedback?
Yeah, no, that's a great question and a death nail to a lot of startups. And a lot of the times that comes to, they get the opportunity to work with a special logo, as I like to call it. So your company's starting up and then some really fancy logo that everybody in your family and friends would be like, holy cow, you guys are working with X. The only problem is X wants a whole lot of custom stuff. And quite frankly, then they're like, well, we don't want to pay you that much because we're X, we're company X, right? And so you get into this double whammy scenario of building a ton of custom stuff that really isn't in line with the product, and you're not getting paid a lot. And that's killed thousands and thousands and thousands of startups just getting stuck there. And whether it was from a financial perspective or dragging the product into its wrong goal. So what we've always done, and we did with Engage, is we started to expand our research we started with obviously some trusted folks that we knew and would provide us candid feedback. But then I went on to interview more than 150 CISOs. Now it's hundreds more of people who were not friends, quote unquote, of Proteus or me or anybody. So they had no vested interest of just making me feel good, and really trying to align the product in that direction, and always kind of looking at now when we say, are we going to add this feature? Do we believe this feature is good for the greater whole of the product, or is this going to take us down a path? The other thing too is when we designed our product with more of an open architecture, right? So people are doing tons of meetings, right? Zoom, GoToMeeting. Well, we're not going to build a meeting system, so we just integrate it with the top ones. So sometimes as you're scaling your product, what you want to think about is it's maybe thinking about the architecture of your product is really what you need to focus on, so you can bring in the best of breed solutions to meet those one-off client needs, but stay in your lane and do what you do really well, and own that. And I think that's the greatest thing I could, pass along to another startup is stay within that. We have a couple of pillars that we're like, stay in our pillars. And if we stay in those pillars, we're going to be successful. And one of them is being seamless, which means making sure that we're open enough to be able to bring in. So we integrate with every CRM, right? We're not going to make our own CRM. There's proliferation of great CRMs out there. So we just plug in right on top seamlessly. Great opportunities for us. So that's the way that we like to handle that challenge, and stay in our lane so we can be successful.
Yeah, no, such good advice. And it is a balancing act, right? Because you stay too far on one path, you may miss it, but the fancy logo, I'm going to borrow that.
And it's resource management too, right? Yeah. Most startups have limited engineering resources or limited sales resources. It's basically limited everywhere, hence a startup, right? So they're typically limited. And so what really becomes the problem is your high energy top people, and usually the CEO is drug into those deals because it's a big logo or a large opportunity. So you got to really look at it. It's just not the product being off track. It's all of your top talent working really for somebody else instead of really working on growing your business, which was your commitment to them. So forget about the money, forget about all that. Go back to the simple promise you made to your team that we're going to take a swing at this, and realize that it's your time and your top people's time being drug away. That's the thing. If you want to level set yourself and make yourself feel good about it. No one ever feels good of going to a big client and saying, we're not going to do it for you, whatever. But here's the thing. A lot of them, if you actually tell them the why correctly, that this is what we do best, this is what we're going to do, and maybe we can plug this in, a lot of them will agree to that, right? They're just going to ask until you say no. And a lot of times the owners or the leaders are afraid to say no. And a lot of times it's the graceful no, right? As you know, Brad, it's not no. It's, well, here's our product path. Here's our product plan. We could maybe integrate with this or do something to quasi appease your special needs, but we want to do that in a way that might help our other clients. And a lot of times they'll be like, that's great. We'll totally do that.
Right. No, it makes so much sense. I'm glad we dug into that a little bit. Yeah. But now transitioning back to the scale, because I think this is where a lot of companies get stuck. And frankly, interviews with founders, that have gone, let's call it $10 million mark, right? It's getting past $1 million is a feat in itself, but getting to 10, all of a sudden you've got to have things clicking, and it's not just one-to-one, hand-to-hand combat anymore. But, where my thinking has kind of evolved, I used to be the traditional, sales and marketing guy. This is the way you do it. But I think to get to this scale, and before I get to the scale, the one, just to reinforce what I've heard is most of these companies, when they were going through their growth evolution, hit a plateau. Mm-hmm. And for the life of me, could never really nail what was consistent about those plateaus. But as it turns out, hearing from the founders themselves, it was, hey, we ran out of my network or the co-founders network of who they could sell into. And so they had folks that knew they had a problem, they could make that sell. But all of a sudden now you got to reach kind of what you're talking about into a new universe of prospects that may or may not know you, may or may not know they have a problem. And so you got to balance on one side the digital awareness, and so people get to know you. But I think there's channels that are underappreciated for the ability to scale. And one being the referral network, right? Remember back in my enterprise sales day, it was, hey, as part of a contract, can you refer us to, no, it wasn't even referral, it was a testimonial, right? It was negotiated in the contract. But now it's, if you really love our product, I love, is there 2 other people you can introduce? People have a really hard time asking for it, but guess what? You're going to scale a lot quicker that way through soft and warm referrals than than that. So I'd love to get your perspective.
Yeah, no, that's a great secret sauce for a lot of startups, and I appreciate you bringing that one up because I'm a big fan of it. And so what happens is you might have clients, especially in the early stage of the startup, where you do get a client that knows kind of you're an early stage startup, and they're like, okay, you want to sell me your product for 25 grand, a year, maybe we'll pay you 10. Will you take 10 grand a year, right? And the founders are like, well, geez, that's a lot of money off, and they're eager to say yes just because of the big logo. But
Right.
I always like to try to convert that extra 15,000 into high value things for you and your company. So like you said, testimonials, videos, introductions, joint webinars, being able to speak at an event for them, doing all sorts of co-branding to generate you additional leads to drive success. That's a big secret nugget that costs nothing. And most of the time the clients are very, very open to doing that, which can really unlock, because like you said, ultimately a lot of companies do kind of plateau a little bit because the Rolodex of the leadership team is kind of exhausted, and they're like, what do we do now? And so I like to not wait till it's exhausted. So a lot of times we're using obviously a network of our leadership team to kind of get things started. But as I mentioned, I started then interviewing people that were not in our network because I wanted to get true validation there. And then we immediately, right from basically, let's say month 6 in, we actually created a reseller program. So we have agencies all over the country and resellers all over the country that refer us in on opportunities. We have referrals coming in from our customers because our client success team does a great job. Again, going back into a great function of client success, can be teeing up those relationships for opportunities for referrals and for other opportunities to come across your desk. And then of course, we're doing traditional formal outbound SDRing and the full kind of traditional sales cadence. So we did not wait long to actually turn on all those elements, because it helps provide you that balanced scorecard where you're not risking everything on the SDRs are going to bring it to win it, right? You have a balanced scorecard of, look, we're getting referrals from current customers. We're doing events that we're getting stuff in, right? We got resellers bringing in opportunities. Our SDRs are bringing in opportunities. And a lot of times for a CEO or a startup, it's not just that those activities are happening. It's that you're hearing messaging and what they're saying about your product and stuff earlier, so that you can course correct packaging or messaging or whatever it might be. You're actually getting a lot of feedback because all these different kind of folks are presenting your stuff to other people, and they're getting questions. And then you're like, well, why are they getting that question? You know where I'm going at. And so that ecosystem of data coming back to you is extremely, extremely valuable for creating success in a kind of growth company there.
Yeah, no, so much good advice and value in that. And, I mean, to be respectful of your time, but I do want to dig in just a little bit.
Yeah.
I know I keep taking us down a few rabbit holes.
Love it.
I think one of the big mistakes I see founders make is when they're looking to, and even you say scale the business, but rapidly grow the business, depending on how you want to define that, is really look at where you're going to get the most reach, right? Because I think the default a lot of the time is, hey, I'm going to hire a sales rep, which again, I'm not saying don't, but when you think about the output of a sales rep, and in the case of an SDR, that's still hand-to-hand combat, right? They may be able to do well, hit their quota, but you're not going to 10x your business unless you're going to hire 150 of these folks, and that's really hard. So think about the opportunities and think about, maybe what I would call non-traditional tactics for B2B, which, it's the referrals. It could be affiliates, right? I think of affiliates, it has to be e-commerce. No, there's other ways to do this with people, they'll call it maybe influencer marketing, but I still think it's done right, it's more of an affiliate type of a program.
Strategic partner program. So like we leverage a very strong, successful SaaS product ourselves inside of our product. And I just met with the CEO and leadership team about how we could do things together, because they love what we're working against and doing that. And this company has thousands of customers, right? And so, like you said, a lot of it is you kind of have to have, the old don't have all your eggs in one basket, right? Like you can't put all the eggs of sales into the SDR basket, right? You need to have these 5 to 7 strategies that you're doing, going out there, affiliates, referrals, channel partners, strategic product partners, all of these things going, so that you're basically building a gigantic qualified funnel. And most importantly, they're coming in much more trusted, right? They're not a typical top of the value or funnel and like MQL or anything like that. They're really, by most of what we get are very strong SQL level, where the group is kind of already like, yeah, we totally like, and the direction that you're going here, let's learn more, right? And
Yep.
so they're coming in much more trusted, much more open to dialogue. And so I agree. It's especially in an early stage company where you might not have the capital to, like you said, ramp up 100 SDRs to really kind of in it to win it. And so that methodology I completely agree upon. And again, it's one of the other caveats to that, though, I would like a lot of startup partners to understand is also look at your current client base, because a lot of times what people, when they first launch their company, they're kind of signing almost any kind of vertical and any kind of client, right? Like we got a manufacturing client here, a healthcare client here, a plumber company here, right? Like all of this disparate. But what you start to see is probably a rhythm over time as you start to get enough clients, really understanding your segmentation there and the why around that, why they're buying, which can really hone your messaging, hone your, again, strategies of who to partner with. Maybe using the plumber one as an example, maybe you're selling to a lot to plumbers. Well, little did you know there are 3 great software products that all plumbers use in the country to run their businesses. Well, you want to know those 3 companies because maybe you want to partner with them or align with them, and you see where I'm getting at here. A lot of times it's understanding how the product is being used, maybe by certain verticals, and then researching the why around that, and then aligning the who, and then you can even get stronger referrals, stronger opportunities, stronger relationships within that more push down segment, because sometimes it's tough when you're like a Swiss Army knife.
Yeah.
A lot of times you want to kind of bring that down so that you can be industry specific solution.
Yeah, no, and that's really good advice. And oversimplifying again, the riches and the niches, and I share that same advice that, hey, get really good in one of the niches and then expand, right? Or
And then expand. Exactly. You might not be able to take on all 6 all at once. So figure out which one your product or service is the strongest in, which is probably going to make your sales cycle dramatically drop to shorter, and then kind of rinse, repeat, get really good at that. And then take that entire process that you've just done within that first vertical and now do the next 2 and maybe the next 3, et cetera, et cetera. And then maybe you don't need to. Maybe that vertical is really the vertical you're supposed to be in. We're learning ourselves. We have a lot of tech clients. So SaaS technology companies was kind of where we started, and we're still growing extensively there. But then all of a sudden we started to have a lot of professional services companies and consulting companies coming to us because their problem was completely different. They were peak and valleying on contracts. They weren't reoccurring revenue like SaaS. It was more, our pipe is very dynamic and we need to maintain our current clients so that we can get projects from current clients. Completely different problem. Our product was solving that problem, but we didn't mind map it to necessarily professional services like that. So now we have a ton of professional services clients. You see how it kind of, the knowledge of that is what is providing us the opportunity to be even better and smarter for those types of clients.
Yeah, and I think just tying it back to full circle with messaging and positioning, and it's got to be specific to that target audience. You can't talk to a plumber the same way you're talking to a roofer, right? It
Exactly.
seems like very similar, but they speak very different languages.
Very different languages. Yep, their concerns, their worries, their everything is different, right? Absolutely everything is different. And so having that little bit of nomenclature, and then more importantly, 3 or 4 use cases of how you've directly impacted a peer of theirs that they're like, oh, okay, game on. You kind of know, because everybody starts the conversation with, Brett, we're different than everyone else you work with. And you're like, oh, come on. Like, I get it in spirit, but usually it's about 20% different. The 80 is still the same.
Yeah.
So it's about understanding that 10 to 20% difference. Then once you understand that, you talk the talk and you walk the walk. And then that builds instant trust and confidence, which again, in a complex sale process is really what everybody's looking for.
Yeah, it's critical. And I think even tying this back full circle where we started the conversation with buyer enablement, it's really taking outside in look at that process. And if you're focused internally on, hey, how do I enable my sales reps to do this and market, again, important, but how do you enable the buyer to use your product up front before you even get there? And then internally, are you providing the right resources to help them through that process? That's
You bet.
fundamentally different than the way we were kind of brought
I
up.
know, I know, and it's the old internal champ, and like I always say, find your internal champ. Well, great. What do you do with the internal champ after you find him? Like, are you equipping him and her for success? How are you defending them when you're not in the room, right? When they have 3 more meetings talking about your product, how does him or her present you guys? How does she align the key stakeholders needed to get this over the line? It's completely buyer centric right now. It is, you're there to help the buyer. You're not there to sell the buyer. You're there to help the key person solve their problem,
Right.
and it's a complete shift. And to your point, it's the long run too. It's a long run play. It is not, short. I always think long in these kinds of transactions, because maybe not today, but recently we've had multiple contracts come through that we had talked to people more than a year ago, and their timing and buying wasn't right. And then all of a sudden, bloop, we've been nurturing them and communicating them through our platform. And then they're like, it's game on, Joe. The timing is right now. The things have aligned. So it's really about providing that value, really provide value and meaningful information for them. And they'll reward you for that at some point.
Yep, 100%, right? It's trust the process and make sure, again, even with the SDR world, right? A lot of them just churn and burn and say, hey, not interested, click, hang up, where, you get an opportunity to create some of that awareness that maybe 6 months, but nobody's looking, everybody's quotas due next month. So nobody's thinking about 6 months. So, the one point I'll end on this, because I think it'll tie it back even further, is I do get feedback from what I would call really good sales reps or enterprise sales reps that, hey, this is what we've been doing. We quarterback deals, we align resources, we provide the tools. I'm like, yes, you do, on a very one-off basis or 2 or 3 deals at a time. The whole key is for your organization to be doing that even when you're not there. So digitally, can your processes support people who are going through it? And maybe not your enterprise deals, but the mid-market, that, it's going to have to be more done offline, or I guess online in that case, and non-conversational. So I think it's just taking what really good enterprise sales reps have known all along and basically digitizing and automating that as much as possible.
100, you hit it right on the head. That's actually the shift that has happened. This selling style was typically for deals over $500,000 or more, right? Like, of course, if it's worth $500,000, you got 3 to 5 people on the selling side and 8 to 10 decision makers on the buying side, of course, right? That's an enterprise sale. You've been, like you said, you've been coached up to that level of selling, right? That's the epitome of salesmanship, is getting to that level. The challenge is that expectation has now been brought down to products that are sold for $12,000 a year.
Yep.
And that's the shift. That's the shift in a nugget, right? And people, and so you got a junior SDR and a junior AE that is now talking to the CIO, the CFO, and the CEO, and a whole C-suite, a lawyer, everybody on a transaction on a $12,000 product. How do you create consistency in that communication, trust, all of that? That's the big shift. That is what is killing a ton of deals right now, is because the reps are still wired as, do you want to buy this or not? I can give you a discount if you buy by November 18th kind of methodologies. And that is not what is going to get it over the line.
No, not anymore. Not if there's alternatives, and there are alternatives. And like I said, I do want to be really respectful of your time. And, I think I'd love to have a part 2 of this conversation where, we've talked about how it's shifted and changing and some of the things that we're doing. I think there's probably another 45 minutes we could spend on how to approach it. So, maybe at the start of the year, once we get through, I'd love to bring you back and go a little bit deeper in some of these areas, because I think it's so important and such a competitive advantage for startups to be able to leverage this mentality and this approach. And they're not finding a lot of resources that tell them how to do this right now, because it's still sales, marketing, customer success, build your silos. And so anyway.
Hit you. 100%.
I appreciate it, Joy. You got 2 questions that I end every podcast with. The first one is, what's next for you and the team as we round out the year here and head into next year?
Yeah, we've had a blessed year. We continue to grow, so we're continuing to scale. Really growing out. Like I said, we're growing out our sales teams, growing out our client success. Really, We're growing in all ways, always. We are building out our customer advisory board officially right now in Q4. So that's officially good. So I never really gave up. As I mentioned at the beginning, I truly believe in it. So we're rolling out our own cab right now with our clients. We've been doing it informally a lot, but we're actually formalizing it now so we can reward and identify, folks around that. So for us, we're really just consistently growing now. I mean, just disciplined growth though. Again, metered growth, most importantly, making sure we're generating value to our customers. And one of the things that some of the environmental changes within the country related to, sales not being able to be face to face and stuff, we see a lot of our clients right now focusing a lot on capital preservation, meaning they're using our tool to communicate to their current customers and kind of starting to work those relationships, even new business relationships, for really having a strong 2021 mid-year. And a lot of our clients are talking about 2022 already.
Wow.
And so how are they teeing themselves up for success in the next 24 months? It's about building those relationships today, which a lot of your listeners know. Maybe the client can't pull the trigger on buying the product now, but you're building that relationship and trust that they can 8 months from now, maybe even 18 months from now. And so a lot of groups are really focusing on doubling down on those relationships, including ourselves. We're doing it using our tool, obviously, and then all of our clients are to really create that opportunity for 21, 22. So those are really the two main focuses we got going on right now.
Yeah, awesome, fantastic. And last but not least, the question I ask everybody is, what is one thing, Joey, you would highly recommend, and it could be personal or professional?
Yeah, for me, maybe it's just because I like to be in the trenches a little bit. I always feel like don't lose the connection with the end user. Now, I'm very, very lucky because we drink our own Kool-Aid. We use our own tool to do B2B sales. So a lot of people don't use their own product. Right. So their company has built a product for somebody else. So you're not in your own product every day. And if that's the case, I encourage you to figure out ways that you can be engaged with the product, no pun intended, but engaged with your product so that you don't lose that connection to the end user. Find ways to have that, because for me, it's always about maybe generation 1, 2, 3 of your product is really good and it's being successful, but maybe the customers are saying all sorts of things to help you with new features and ideas for 3, 4, 5 new versions of the product or seismic opportunities that you might be missing out on. So it's kind of like never lose that connection. I was talking to another group the other day, and a very, very successful, basically chief customer officer for a huge organization. And I said to her, I really like your style. And she's like, well, here's the deal. I still maintain some clients, right? So she's chief client officer and she still has clients underneath her. And she is directly doing meetings with clients, training them, understanding them. And she's like, Joe, I never want to lose that connection, because that's what really helps us be grounded in how can we create more opportunities and more value for them. And so if there's one takeaway, I really feel like that's critical as your company, because there's a lot of pressure as a sales leader or a CEO to not be involved in a lot of things. And I get that. And you got to be doing what you're supposed to be doing to grow the org, but figure out a way to still maintain that connection.
Yeah, no, that's such really good advice. And I don't know if you noticed, if you actually gave us 2 little pieces of wisdom there. And one, I just, want to double back just quickly on is, using your own product, or it used to be eat your own dog food, or if you want to go in the upscale, drink your own wine type of approach. Right. But, I think you used to be able to get away with not doing that. But I think the first question, either an investor or a potential customer, is like, oh, are you using your own product? And if you say no, then if it's not good enough for you,
right.
I mean, it sounds super simple, and I get it because you're so focused on the build out and making sure they're good. But figure out a way to at least incorporate into your business model as you're doing, especially in the B2B, and you're supporting other B2B. And a little thing, but you're going to be asked. If you haven't been, you will be. It's that time's coming. So no, that's awesome. And that's a new, after 80 plus episodes, that's the first time I've had that response. But, I'm a big fan of, customer advocate, customer connection. So I think awesome. Makes perfect sense. So, great. Joey, if there's folks that want to find you and connect with you outside of this, what's the best place for them to find you?
Sure. Lots of resources, white papers, podcasts, lots of resources around buyer enablement, the why, all at our corporate site, www.proteus, proteus.co, and tons of information there that you can sign up for, webinars, all sorts of stuff that kind of really explain the why around all this. Again, just like in B2B sales, like we're not convincing anybody. It's understanding that the shift is happening and how are you best equipped to handle that. So yeah, love great resources there. Encourage everybody to check them out.
And they can connect with you on LinkedIn.
Yep, LinkedIn, Joseph Knecht at LinkedIn, Proteus, anywhere you're at on our site, you'll be able to get connections to our leadership team beyond myself. Also, if you have a client success idea or really any kind of feedback, our team is always, we're in the spirit of helping people grow.
That's awesome. And I can't leave this podcast without mentioning you may have the best, and it's not a stage name, Joey Knecht,
no,
in the business world, and likes to connect with customers. And it is K-N-E-C-T.
Right, K-N-E-C-T. My dad was a police officer in New York. My mom worked in the schools. They had no idea about the software. So no idea.
All right, Joe, I really appreciate it. Thank you again for taking the time.
Awesome.
Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, sir.
All right, cheers.